Y'all here? How many of y'all remember me at all? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of new faces, and there's a lot of old faces. So you're seeing an old face, and some of you are seeing a new old face. So Ron's passing out some handouts. Yeah, you ran. Yeah, if we do one per couple, that I probably should have said that before we started passing them out. Any extras ended up back there? Who? All right, and that's my bad on that. For those of you who don't know, I think I was here in 2019 helping Bobby out a little bit. I told all the preachers in town, if y'all ever want anybody to come in and fill in for you or help you out on a particular night or something like that, I'll do it for like up to 3 months. And I actually violated that the past year and a half. But anyway, so I was out here for about 3 months, I think, in about 2019. So it's good to see y'all again. If you have your Bibles, turn to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1. We're going to take a look at the whole chapter, but just kind of read a little bit, talk a little bit, read a little bit, talk a little bit. And let's start off with the first couple of verses there. I'll wait till everybody gets there. Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. These he brought to the land of Shinar and placed the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Okay. If you take a look there on the handout, again, if you want to follow along on the handout, there's a couple places in there where you write in stuff and stuff like that. I think if you not only hear a lesson but also see it, notes, and then write stuff, it helps you to kind of remember some things some more. But if you go back to the history of Israel, you know the story. Abraham was called by God and says, your descendants are going to, I'm going to bless you and bless your descendants and make a nation out of you. That forwards on down to you end up, Jacob has 12 sons become the Israelites. They end up in Egypt. They come up out of Egypt, from under Pharaoh. They're brought into the promised land. They conquer everybody there, and they become a well-established nation. And along the way, they go to Mount Sinai, and God gives them commandments. First one, I think, if I recall, was this: you shall have no other gods before you. And I think the second one was, do not make any graven images. So this idolatry stuff is right off the top, 1 and 2, don't do this. Guess what the Israelites did? They did exactly that. And God says, if you ever do this, then I will come and punish you. The way I'll do that is I will break a foreign nation, come in and conquer you and take you away in captivity. Now, the northern, don't want to get too far into this, but the nation of Israel actually had a civil war, and they divided into the southern nation of Judah and the northern tribes that were just called Israel, sometimes Samaria, sometimes Ephraim. The prophets will give us different names for them. But the northern tribes had already been conquered and taken away by the Assyrians. And so here is the tribe of Judah with some people from Benjamin, a few Levites and others that are in this situation of like, whoo, I hope that doesn't happen to us. But we're just going to keep on worshiping other gods and keep doing the idols, and let's just see what God's really going to do. Because the temple's down here in Jerusalem and all. Just not too smart. So bottom line, the Israelites kept doing things, and God sent several prophets to them, Habakkuk and Zephaniah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others, saying, turn from your ways or this thing's going to happen to you. Now keep your hand there in Daniel 1. Turn with me back to Isaiah chapter 39. And we'll just read the whole chapter here. It says, that time King Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan of Babylonian, sent envoys with letters and a present to King Hezekiah, for he heard that he had been sick and had recovered. And you can read about that earlier in Isaiah. You also read it over, I think, in 2 Kings. But anyway, verse 2, Hezekiah welcomed them. He showed them the treasure, his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious oil, his whole armory, all that was found in the storehouses. There was nothing in his house or in all of his realm that Hezekiah did not show them. Then the prophet Isaiah came to King Hezekiah and said to him, "What did these men say? From where have they come to you?" Hezekiah answered, "They have come to me from a far country, from Babylon." He said, "What have they seen in your house?" Hezekiah answered, "They've seen all that is in my house. There is nothing in my storehouses that I did not show them." This is the same Babylon that we read in Daniel 1. Here's what's going to happen in the future. So Isaiah is speaking here, and this is before all this stuff happened. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of Yahweh of hosts. Days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your ancestors have stored up until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says Yahweh. Some of your own sons who are born to you shall be taken away. They shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of Yahweh that you have spoken is good. For he thought, there will be peace and security in my days. It's not on my watch, whatever. But notice it doesn't say he's going to come and get you. He's going to come and get your sons. And that's what you're reading about in Daniel. Not that it's actually the sons of this king. But one of the things that the Babylonians would do is they go in and conquer a nation. And when they would conquer the nation, they would just leave them there, but they would take the cream of the crop, the royalty, the nobility, the people that scored 1,000 on their SAT test. I don't even know what the scoring is on that, but the top of the top, we're going to get the most skilled people, the most intelligent people, the most capable people, and we're going to take them to Babylon, retrain them, utilize their skill to make Babylon even greater and greater, and we've already taken away from them the best of the best. And so the idea was, we conquer you, we take the best from you, leave you behind with what you've got. It's going to better us, and it's going to diminish you, and so that makes us become more and more powerful. That's a practice that they did. The interesting thing with the Israelites is after that happened, they kept rebelling until everybody was pretty much taken away and just scattered throughout Babylon. So that's the picture that you have. You're on the handout, it's part 2, part B. This is long before Jerusalem was destroyed. This is when Jerusalem was just conquered, and they took the best of the best. Well, among the best of the best was the silver and the gold, but they also took a bunch of the royalty, the nobility. Guys like Daniel, Ashariah, Mishael. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to Daniel 1, starting in verse 3. Then the king commanded his palace master, Ashpenaz, to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. You see this? The best of the best. And we're going to teach them some new stuff. We're going to teach them our language and our literature. Because you know what's right in the middle of your literature in that ancient time? It's how the true gods, Marduk, in their view, was greater than Yahweh. Otherwise, Yahweh would not have gotten defeated by Marduk, and we wouldn't have conquered them. So we need to teach them literature so we can kind of straighten their minds up about this is the way you really need to think and believe. All that Yahweh stuff that you backward hillbillies learned. Let us teach you the educated way of the city, of the kingdom of Babylon. So it's a retraining program. Can I use the word? A word that I didn't even know the last time I was here. Let us gaslight you. Y'all familiar with that term, gaslight? It's where you try to get somebody to be convinced that everything you thought was true is not true. This is really this over here. And it's become a word because we're living in a culture of gaslighting that's just unbelievable to me. Let me ask you a question. Let's get away from that and let's just talk a little bit. How many of you would say that the United States of America seems to be becoming a more and more Christian nation every year? Nobody? Okay. How many of you would say it's becoming less and less of a Christian nation? Okay. Some people would argue, look, we've gotten rid of slavery and a lot of other things, but I think most of us would say is this world that I'm living in is really don't even know what to believe anymore. Yeah, okay. And I don't want to push that too much because that could get into politics maybe to some extent. But I just want you to notice the Daniel story. The Daniel story is a very good story to read when you're talking about living in a world that does not go along with what you believe. And this chapter right here gives you a lot of good equipment, a lot of good help in knowing how to live in that kind of world. So let's keep reading. Verse 5. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal potions of food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years. It's almost like a short college, isn't it? Where we take these young kids that were raised up in homes and says, get them in our universities. We'll train them how to think. Okay, the king assigned them a daily portion. They were to be educated for 3 years so that at the end of that time, they could be stationed in the king's court. You know, take these guys with a rough edge, with a lot of capability, a lot of insight and all. Let's retrain them, and then they can be right here in the king's court. And that's where Daniel ends up. He actually, by the time you get to the end of the book of Daniel, he's the number one guy with the number one people out there that have gone through this training program. And it's not just Israelites, it's all kinds of people. Verse 6, among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And I would say, if I came in here first and said, do you know who Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were? Most of you would say, I don't know the real names of the three stooges. I don't know. We're not familiar with those names. Let's keep reading, though. From the tribe of Judah, the palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Now we can't relate to it that much in English, but all these names start bringing out the names of the gods of the Babylonians. Marduk, Nego, Shadrach has it in the root of one of their gods' names. And it's after their own names that were named after Yahweh. Mishael. The El means God, and Ayah is Yahweh. And so these names like Jeremiah, Yah is Yahweh. Daniel, my God is judge, I think is what that means. But they're taking their names that in Hebrew meant Yahweh, 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 and they start giving Marduk and these other names. So re-identify yourself. We're even going to take the basic name that you've always had, but we're going to change it just enough so you we're trying to gaslight you. We're trying to get you to think differently, re-perceive everything and think that everything you always thought is wrong and something else is better. So they give them those names, and we know them to this. Isn't it interesting? We know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we always know, you don't know Daniel as Belteshazzar, do you? You always know him as Daniel. I think it's interesting in the book of Daniel. It's like, Daniel is the key one, and we're not going to let his name change over. So anyway, so they gave him a new name. They gave him a time frame, the agenda, the time frame, and the goals. The goal was to retrain them so they thought differently, a 3-year time frame, and the agenda is change everything about them. Change their name, change their diet, change their language, change their understanding of good literature. Do all these things so that we change them from Israelite worshipers of God to Babylonian scholars in this invincible national identity. Let's keep reading. Verse 8, probably the best word to underline in this chapter is the third word, at least in my translation. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of the food and wine, so he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. Now God allowed Daniel to receive favor and compassion from the palace master. The palace master said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your age, you would endanger my head with the king. I don't want to do what you're asking because it's my head that's on the block. I'd rather just tell you, do this, just do it. Just do it. Verse 11, then Daniel asked the guard whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations and deal with your servants according to what you observe. So he agreed to this proposal to test them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. We live in the 21st, no, we don't live in the 24th century. Yes, that was Buck Rogers. But anyway, or whatever. He may have been in the 21st century too. I can't remember. But back in those days, everybody was skinny, and if you were fat, you were healthy. Does that make sense? Because it's not obese fat, it's stout and all. So I want you to notice some dynamics here. Daniel says, I'm not going to eat the king's rations. I'll just be flat out honest with you. You can study it on your own sometime. I don't know what the deal was. It was this wine would be offered up. The wine would be offered up to some pagan. You can go if you need to. It was offered up to this pagan god, and I'm not going to do that. Or it could be, I'm going to trust God in this specific matter. Or it could have been God just made sure that this diet of water and vegetables would make him better because Daniel's going to be my proof case. Whatever the dynamics is, Daniel's saying, I am not going to cross this line. He didn't mind if you changed his name. He didn't mind if you taught him a new language. He didn't mind those things, but I'm not going to worship your gods. Chapter 3, we know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow down to that God. This isn't about Daniel. This is about us. The question is, you need to be drawing lines in your life saying, this is where I will not cross over. This is where I'm not going to let them get to me. I'm going to stay with this because this is what God clearly says. Okay, let's keep going. I want to, let's just read the rest of it. At the end of the 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had eaten the royal rations. So the guard continued to withdraw their royal rations and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. Notice the real one behind this is not this neat diet. It's not so much this neat diet plan. It's God was taking care of the situation. And I shouldn't be up here preaching, but if you just do what God says, He is going to bless you in the end. Okay. Just a side note there. That one was for free. Verse 18. At the end of the time that the king had set for them to be brought in the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. And among all of them, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they were stationed in the king's court. In every matter of wisdom and understanding concerning which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel continued there until the first year of King Cyrus. In other words, Daniel stayed there for as long as the Babylon kingdom existed, because Cyrus is the one that came in and destroyed the Babylonians, and then they lost their kingdom. And it's as if God, I think sometimes God works in providential ways, where he has somebody like Daniel end up always being there right next to Nebuchadnezzar, always advising him throughout it all. Now, let's move away from that because I don't care for history lessons. What's important, I had a great guy say one time, only 3 things you need to do when you preach. Read what the text says, explain what it means, and ask the question, so what? And if you don't get to the so what, it's worthless. So the so what is this. How does all this apply to us? And I just want to share with you some things. The issue for Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is, who am I? And who will I be in this new environment? And they knew what the answers were supposed to be. But don't we always know what the answers are supposed to be? We even talked about it in class a while ago. Which do you do first, worry or go to the Lord, or what was the third one? Or work hard to do whatever. And the first response from somebody, I won't say who, but they say, I'll worry first and then I go on to this other thing. It's okay, so the question for Daniel and them is that we know what we ought to be, but who are we going to be in this environment? You be what you ought to be, okay? And I want to just share with you 3 different possibilities when you find yourself in a hostile environment. where the world is world. Can you imagine that the world is worldly? Does that make sense to you? I mean, that makes sense. Jesus will come out and say that. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But we are not to be of the world. We're to be different from the world. Now, here's the three things that can happen when you find yourself in a vastly different culture. And I'm talking about Daniel as an Israelite in Babylon, or I'm talking about somebody from Venezuela that finds himself in America, or an Italian that finds himself in America. Three different things can happen. First one is this: you assimilate. That is, when in Rome, what? Do as the Romans. You kind of learn, you kind of adapt, and this, that, and the other. And so take somebody that's come from, let's say, Venezuela. They come here speaking what? Spanish, yeah, which is a language in Venezuela. And what do they do if they assimilate? They start learning to speak English. Now, the first generation doesn't as much, and the second generation is kind of half and half. Third generation, it's gone. Who I was no longer exists because I now speak English rather fluently. My son, I was in Texas for many years when we were raising our kids. My son took Spanish class, and there's 5 or 6 Spanish kids. He says, everybody was saying, "Man, you ought to do well in here." I don't know any Spanish, and it was really interesting because they had totally assimilated. So that's the first thing. Give in to the culture around you. Give in to the environment and become just like it. The second thing you can do is isolate. What do I mean by isolate? You go there, but you get with a group of people that are part of your group, and you just isolate yourself from the culture. This would happen in a place like Chinatown, where everybody will speak Chinese and keep doing all the things. And it's almost like you stepped into China when you go to that part of San Francisco or wherever it is. We do the same thing when we go to military families go over to, say, Germany or somewhere else. They stay on this little American compound, and everybody stays there, and it's like little America right there in the middle of Stuttgart or Berlin or wherever. And it's this idea of I'm not going to become like that culture, and I'm not going to become like that culture. The problem with isolation when it comes to us as Christians is God said, do not isolate yourself from the world. Be in the world, but not of the world. So you don't assimilate with the world. That's a real problem. You don't isolate from the world because that's a real self-centered thing that God, I think, is going to condemn. So let me just throw out a third word for you. It's the word insulate. When you insulate, you go into the world with protection on. Like a fireman. Have you seen the pictures of firemen when they go into a burning building? What are they wearing? Short sleeves because it's going to be hot in there. You don't want to get too hot, right? Now, what do they wear?
They wear overcoats and fire prevention.
Okay, they wear fireproof garments. Do they look like they'd be a nice things to be wearing in a hot environment? No, but they're designed what? To retard the flames so that you can be in there where you need to be in the heat, but not get consumed by the heat. Does that make sense? Now, I don't want to get too embarrassing here, but in the wintertime, you stay in the house. But if you need to go out and get firewood, or you need to go feed the chickens or water the cows or whatever, you need to go out there. So what do you put on before you go out there? Insulated underwear. And hopefully some more stuff, but that's it. And the whole point of that is not to keep you from going out there or let you go out there and freeze yourself to death. It's to go out there and yet be protected by the hostile environment that you're going into. Does that make sense? Now, we've seen that with Daniel, but let's talk about it in relationship to some of the things Jesus said. And I've got 3 applications for you. And the first is this. What's your name again? Jeff.
Yeah.
Everybody say,
great job.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
It just goes downhill from here. Do you record this? I kind of gathered that other. You can go out, let's take a look at the rest of it on the thing. Okay, 3 points. The first one is this. We need to recognize our world. Yeah. Peter were here, he had the keys of the kingdom. Could have got him out. Okay, did anybody hear my first point? Okay, here we go. First point, we need to recognize our world. It is so amazing how blind you can be to your culture and the ways in which it is not in the will of God. In the first century, do you think the scribes and Pharisees thought, we know God, we know His Word, we know what He wants, and we know how to live our lives? Would you say the scribes and Pharisees felt like that? What did Jesus say about them? You guys are so blind. Read Matthew 23 and notice how many times Jesus says, scribes and Pharisees, you blind guides, you blind hypocrites, you're blind. It is so hard to see vividly the Word of God and the culture about you in those areas where it's like, I do that too. And it a lot of times will come to things like greed or gossip or the things that everybody does that you don't even stop and think about. But the thing I want you to do is is to recognize the world that you live in. Now, I got a couple of passages here. John chapter 15, verse 19. John chapter 15, verse 19. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. John kind of gives a different focus. Matthew, Mark, and Luke will focus on his prayer in Gethsemane. And you have Jesus there with his disciples before he actually goes into Gethsemane, talking about, I'm the vine, you are the branches. Don't want to get into too much, but he's passed through the Kidron Valley, and there are grapevines around there, and he says, I'm the true vine. My Father's the vineyard. He says several things, but here's what he says down in verse 19. Starting in verse 18, if the world hates you, be aware that it hated me before it hated you. She's saying, I was first. They hated me. You're next. By the way, they're going to crucify me. And we'll just see about you, but just kind of be ready for anything. If you belong to the world would love you as its own. Because you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. So we got to recognize up front that the world that we live in, and we're talking about the evil world that's under the power of Satan, that world hates you. It hated Jesus, it hated his disciples, it's hated everybody since then that shows allegiance to Jesus Christ. And you've got to recognize that. And in that context, realizing that, you think, okay, well, what do I do? Now turn over to chapter 17, verse 15. Jesus is praying this high priestly prayer there in the Garden of Gethsemane. And again, is not, Lord, take this cup away from me, not your will, but my will be done. I think John knew that had been stressed and emphasized. And he says, I want to kind of focus on a different angle. So in chapter 17, verse 15, as Jesus is praying to God the Father, he says this, to God the Father, I am not asking you to take them, my 11 remaining apostles, take them out of the world, but I ask you to protect them from the evil one. I don't want isolation. Isolation is not a good Christian option. Insulation is. He says again, notice what he says, I am not asking you to take them out of the world, that's isolation, but that you would protect them from the evil one. I don't want them to assimilate. What I want them to do is to be in the world, but not of the world, not be taken out of the world, but be protected in the midst of the world from the evil one. And the evil one's in control of the world. He's called the prince of this world. And so the second thing I want you to mention there is this. We are behind enemy lines. I've never been in the military, but I've seen enough movies to where it's like one of the scariest places to be is to have, here's this army, and here's this army, and you're part of this army here. And then as the fighting goes on, you know, these people may get killed, and the enemy is marching around you, and they're marching, against your people, but you're stuck here behind enemy lines, and you're like, whoa, and what do I do? I'm behind enemy lines. And that's the exact picture that we're born into in this world. Or at least as Christians, I guess what I'm saying is, if you are a Christian, you are living behind enemy lines your entire life in this world. Because it's this picture that the prince of this world is Satan. Now, Jesus, through his death, did throw him out, but as far as Satan's power, it is still ongoing. And we can get into book of Revelation, and Satan knows his time is short, and Peter talking about your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion looking for someone to devour, and this picture of this that's ongoing. So let's move to part two. The first thing we need to do is just recognize what's going on, that we are like Daniel in Babylon. We are in this situation where God's saying, do not assimilate with the world. Don't isolate yourself, because Daniel couldn't. I mean, he was thrown right in. He wasn't thrown in the lion's den. That comes later. But he was thrown right into the Babylonian world. And it was like, okay, what do I do now? So the first thing is recognize this world that we're in, that we're behind enemy lines. We're not in the world. We're not of the world, but we are in the world. The second thing we need to do is to reject that world that's trying to gaslight us, as it were. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, real good verse. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. J.B. Phillips is a paraphrase, which basically means, instead of translating it, kind of looks at it in the original language and say, how would you say this in English? And if I'm not mistaken, he translates it something like this: do not let the world press you into its mold. And it's interesting, the words that are used there, conform and transform. So there's formation, and then there's confirmation, then there's transformation. And to be conformed to this world is for the world to form you in its image, or what it wants. And what Paul says is you need to be transformed so that it's kind of like a transformer. It takes it from over here and sends it over there. Don't be a part of that world, but be transformed over, and it comes in your mind. And it's in your mind, you're always thinking, Jesus is Lord. He's got a call for my life. This is the way to go. Keep reading the Bible so you can start to see this isn't right, and this isn't right, and this isn't right. Jesus constantly did this with his disciples, where he basically said, don't think like everybody else. Even and especially with this culture that we live in here in Israel, where everybody's reading the Word of God and this, that, and the other, and saying, this is what we ought to do. When they came to arrest Jesus, remember what Peter pulled out? His Bible, right? His Torah scroll. What did he pull out? A sword. And what did Jesus say? Put that thing away! He says, those who live by the sword will die with the sword. We don't do like this. Do you remember what he said to his disciples when it came to service? He says, whoever wants to be great needs to do what? Become a servant of all. Do not be like the nations who lord it over you, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give himself as a ransom for many. You have other things where Jesus says, you've heard it said, love your neighbors and hate your enemies, because we got to make those decisions there, and love your neighbor but hate your enemy. And Jesus says, no, love everybody. Peter says, Pharisees say I should forgive 3 times. I think I should forgive 7 times. What do you think about that, Jesus? Jesus said, try 70 times 7, 490. Then once you get to that, let's go a few more thousand. He didn't actually say that, but that's kind of the intent of 70 times 7. Don't think like the world thinks. Kind of dare to say it. Don't even think like the typical 21st century American Christian thinks. Keep getting back to this. Don't let anything outside of the teaching of Jesus in his words, but especially in his life, say, this is how you live. The last thing, and then we're out of here. We need to impact our world. We need to get off defense and start playing offense. And I don't mean ugly Bible-banging stuff. What I'm saying is Daniel is very gentle and meek. He goes to the guy and say, we don't want to eat this. Put us to the test. Let's just see let's just, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I like it especially going away from Daniel to Jesus, where Jesus says, you are the light of the world. A city that's set on the hill cannot be hidden. And those of you who got a chance to do the scripture we said together just a few minutes ago out of John chapter 1, do you remember what it says? The light came into the world and the darkness did not comprehend it or did not understand it or couldn't. It's John's neat because he uses double entendre where the word could be translated one of a couple different ways. But light, when light and darkness meets, which one wins? Light, because light penetrates the darkness. The darkness just says, let's find something that we can keep the light out. Notice, light is powerful in going forward. And that's what you see with Daniel. And that's what you see with Jesus. And that's what you see when he says, you're the salt of the earth. Get out of the salt shaker and get into the world. Be out there as light, shining and penetrating the world. And so the last little point I want to mention there is this. I think we have too much passivity in the church. That too many times we're in a friendly environment like that and say, boy, isn't the world out there bad? And fret and let's say some prayers about it that God will fix it. Instead of saying, we have truth, we have light, and live it, so that the world starts asking us questions. I love the passage in 1 Peter 3:15 that says this, set apart Jesus Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to answer for anyone that asks you for the reason of your hope. Most people aren't asking. And maybe it's because we're not living such beautiful, transformed life that people say, what have you got? I want that. And maybe if we start doing that, not isolating ourselves from the world or the like, but start being out there in such a way that people start saying, I want that. Look at how those men are handsome and more wise and this, that, and the other. No, their names have all been changed to pagan names, right? Yeah, but I don't think their heart's in it. I think they really still believe in Yahweh. And the next thing you notice, read the rest of Daniel, because Nebuchadnezzar says, the only God is the God of Israel. and on down the line. Okay, thanks for listening. And just live your life this week, kind of with these Daniel principles.